Hello and welcome. My name is Belma Sadikovic. Thank you for joining us for today's roundtable discussion, Enhancing Academic Operations in Higher Education. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few things briefly to ask questions. For the panel, please do use the Q&A feature. You can ask your questions at any time, and you can also ask anonymously. And if you haven't done so, please feel free to activate your closed captions. And last but not least, I wanted to just remind everyone that this webinar is being recorded and it will be available on our ACRO website within the next 24 hours. And without any further ado, I would like to hand it over to Dr. Wendy Kilgore to get us started. Thanks, Wendy.
Thank you, Belma. Welcome, everyone. We have 245 who registered for this roundtable. And we don't know how many will join us today, but that's a very large crowd for a roundtable. And we have 60 seconds and a lot of excellent folks with us here today who volunteered their time and energy to participate in today's roundtable and also to author the chapters in the book. So these are folks who wrote chapters in the Academic Operations and the Role of the Registrar book. And if you're not familiar with that book, Heather's going to post it in the chat so you can see a link to it. I think it's our newest publication, our most recent publication, correct? So these are some of the authors who helped write that book. And very much thank you for your time and effort. So what we are going to do is go a few questions roundtable and ask the folks. If we see Q&A questions popping up, we will set aside 10 to 15 minutes at the end to address those questions. If we don't see them, we'll just continue with the roundtable discussion. And absolutely want to hear from those of you who are participating whether or not we need to have more of these and be more focused on some particular aspect of academic operations. Because as we included in the book and elsewhere, academic operations is kind of a new term. And depending on your institution, it could be anything from registration records, curriculum management, managing the class schedule, dealing with shared governance, accreditation, all kinds of areas can fall under the label of academic operations. There isn't any one standard, but there tends to be a lot of areas. And so if you think we need to have more of these, let us know in the chat or in the Q&A or send us a message. And without further ado, because 60 seconds, 60 minutes goes by like 60 seconds sometimes. When we're doing these things, I want to have the group introduce themselves, and then we'll jump into the questions. So Julia, would you like to go first?
Oh, sure. Thank you, Wendy. I'm Julia Pomrick. I work as the University Registrar at University of Oregon, and I'm also someone who's fortunate enough to be on the ACRO board. So I'm happy to be part of this webinar today.
Thank you, Julia. Jana, would you like to go second?
Good afternoon. I'm Jana Oakes. I serve as the Vice President for Institutional Effectiveness at Rocky Vista University and also as the Accreditation Liaison Officer.
Thank you. Mark?
I'm Mark McConaughey. I'm ACRO's Innovative Credential Coordinator, and before that I was Registrar at Indiana University in Bloomington.
Thank you. I'm just going along with the rows that I see folks on. Everybody sees them differently. Jason?
Hi, I'm Jason Brown. I work in the curriculum office at Pima Community College. My title is project manager, and our office encompasses curriculum, student learning outcomes assessment, and accreditation.
Tammy?
Good afternoon. I'm Tammy Agard. I'm a managing consultant with ACRO Consulting, and prior to that, spent many years as a registrar as well as Associate Vice President for Enrollment Management.
Jackie?
Hello, I'm Jackie Kazaza. I am Assistant Provost and University Registrar at Northwestern University.
Thank you. Erin?
Good afternoon. I'm Erin Mason, and I'm University Registrar at University of Utah.
Connie?
Good afternoon. I'm Connie Newsome. I am the Director of Registrar Services at Campbell University School of Law, and I serve as the VP at Large on the ACRO board and the board secretary for the National Network of Law School Officers.
Thank you. Sarah?
I'm Sarah Croucher. I'm Assistant Vice Provost for Academic Affairs at the University of Connecticut. I am not a registrar, but I talk to them a lot. And I do a lot with academic programs and curriculum work, and I am an accreditation liaison officer.
And finally, last but not least, Jennifer.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jen. I lead product marketing at CourseDog. We're the academic operations platform. We help institutions manage their operational processes like curriculum management, catalog management, class scheduling, assessment management, and accreditation in one holistic platform with one bi-directional integration back to your SIS. The majority of my job is really spent with registrars and provosts, understanding what are key challenges and pain points and how we can build solutions around them. Really excited to be on the panel today.
Thank you. And CourseDog was a sponsor for helped underwrite our book and this webinar. So thank you again to CourseDog. All right, so we're going to jump right in. That took 6 minutes and we got 54 minutes left, but unless we have some Q&A, then we'll make that time again. So first question, how do you see the increasing diversification of credentials, such as badges and micro-credentials, impacting traditional academic records and operations? Mark, you hopped right in there.
Yeah. Well, actually, this is right up my alley. And of course, it's the chapter of the book that I authored. And I think the best way to explain this is a credential is a credential. And there's increasing pressure upon our institutions to capture learning and assert it on the student's behalf, whether it happened curricularly within the classroom or outside the classroom. As a result of that, we have to, meaning registrars, have to put our professional record-keeping services to the fore. In other words, we are experts at this on the curricular side. If we're going to take these in and assert them on our students' behalf, and they are emanating from places that we're not accustomed to, not coming from the curriculum, we have to apply the same set of practices and policies that we do to the curricular side. We know how to do this because, after all, we are record professionals. There's a couple things to say. One is, I think it does add to our overall workload, so we need to pay attention to that. But remember, we have parallels to follow. We know how to do this, and it is both good for the institution and good for the learners who attend our institutions.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to talk about the diversification in credentials? Jason.
So I agree with what Mark said. I think one of the challenges that's happening at my institution is trying to figure out how to do that integration of these types of awards with our traditional certificates and degrees. Like all the sort of complex behind the scenes questions, like how do we display these in the catalog? What do they look like? Are they alongside the other kinds of awards, or are they some separate section? And kind of trying to work through all the details of that as we're always sort of building the plane as we're flying it. So right now, I think we're coming in pretty close. So right now we're building the landing gear while we're landing. And I think that's probably pretty common for most folks.
Julia.
I think what I would add is, Jason, I like the plane analogy, and to know that in ACRO, both among our staff colleagues and our other colleagues, there are people ahead of us with the building of the plane. And so if we're just sort of beginning to think about building the plane on our campus, to know that in the same way as is true across our profession, there are people ahead of us. And thank goodness they talk to us and they share their ideas. And so we have that sort of head start to mix now both running and planes, I guess, because other people are ahead of us in the conversation. So that's, again, the big bonus for me for everything I don't understand very well yet, is that there's a Mark and there's a Jason, and there are people who are ahead of me in the conversation.
Julia, that's a very good point. And I actually want to put a little plug for Accro Exchange, which just turned to a year. So that's if you're a member of Accro, you can go into Accro Exchange and post these questions. And folks are very helpful in responding and reaching out to your and giving you the information you need or want to find out. That was not very articulate. Accro Exchange, you can ask questions there. So we also have Jana and then Sarah.
Julia, Jason, and Mark are absolutely correct. And the other piece here that I'm sure is concerning some of the registrars has to do with systems. So many of the student information systems know how to deal with credit-bearing credentials, but are really lagging in terms of helping to provide solutions for non-credit bearing credentials. And so this is an area where I think perhaps ACRO could help apply some pressure and help us articulate the need.
Sarah?
So we're in that kind of building our own plane, and definitely have been leaning on some of the materials that are out there from ACRO. And we've got a lot of faculty involved in the conversation about what micro-credentials can be, right? For me, I have a lot of concerns about how we make sure they're quality. And I think we have this tension between, on the one hand, things that are high quality but can be more agile also than perhaps traditional credentials, maybe don't have as much of the kind of curricular deep work behind them that we would have for some of our traditional academic programs. And so how do we kind of enable some of that speed and flexibility while also keeping our guardrails on? And I think making sure that the registrar is at the table when faculty are making plans for this is so important, because the things that have just been said about, like, what happens when someone comes back, right? How long does a micro-credential last? Is it time limited? Who can issue them? How do we actually know that someone really did get a micro-credential from our institution? I can say from the discussions that we've had that we have faculty who are just like, yeah, we'll issue these. Here they are, right? Like, here's this thing that exists. And then someone shows up, right, in 5 years and says, like, I need to validate that I got this thing from this university, and we don't have a record of that. And so I think it's really one where registrars should advocate for the expertise that they bring to the discussions in building what these are and what the infrastructure around them needs to be at each institution that fits with the purposes.
Thank you very much. And Jen, I think you couldn't combine maybe others can't either, because I think they relabeled it in Zoom. So under React, that's where you can raise your hand, but you can also just do this and I can typically see you as long as your background doesn't erase your hand like mine is trying to do. So Jen, you wanted to add something? I'm sorry, you're muted still.
I just found it. Should just clicked on the React button. I was going to say it's interesting from the partner side. We've actually seen an influx in requests on how to manage non-degree, non-credential courses within CourseDog, right? Because so much of managing this new area is really having new curricular workflows, having new forms, understanding what types of data needs to go into the forms, who needs to validate all of this data. So there's actually a lot of operational complexity we've realized institutions now need to really confront. And it's been interesting to see how a lot of institutions are using this as opportunity to actually double click into their workflow processes and really think about what are the right procedures here.
Thank you, Jen. And it is this very complex interrelationship between non-credit and credit and converting them and then getting them, as Mark noted earlier, all of the things about a credential and keeping the guardrails around the curriculum. So it's a very complex process. We have a lot of benchmarking research out there and some paper, other white papers on the subject. It's available through ACRO Research. Mark, you still have your hand up. Did you have a follow-up comment to that question? You just took it down. You're muted. Sorry, Mark, you're muted.
And you know, those were actually the best comments I'll ever make in my life, and you guys just missed them. The one I was just gonna, Jason reminded me of this, all very good points. System integration is going to be key. And as you think about that, there's a couple of relationships you're going to have with other platforms, and you're going to have to pay attention now as a registrar to what data is there, what authority is associated with them. The other thing to think about is, what is the system of record? We're used to it being the student information system. It may now be more broadly defined. We're going to have to think about that and exert policies and practices over those platforms, which may contain your system of record. The last thing to say is pay attention to your contractual relationship to your platform, particularly if it's a credential issuing platform. They may have all the records that you need in order to place them into your system of record. They may have disclosure information, metadata, the kinds of things that you need to understand what you're issuing and how to support that learner in the years to come. What happens if your contractual relationship ends?
That's a very good point. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for addressing that question. The second we have is two parts, and I'll just list both parts together because they're side, and you can address one or both. What are the biggest challenges facing registrars and others in supporting student success around all of these aspects of academic operations? So what are the biggest challenges facing folks who are trying to support student success in academic operations? And how can these challenges be addressed, or how have you addressed some of those challenges? Jackie.
Thank you. So this is something I think about a lot, how we get in our own way. And I think sometimes our own thinking and our own traditions are the biggest challenges to supporting student success. In my experience, folks in registrars' offices and in work, that's related, we really think of ourselves as kind of standard bearers. And that is with good intent. But it's very easy to get stuck in this is the way we've always done it and not really dig deeply into why and how our institutional and cultural goals have changed since we started doing that in 1852 in Northwestern's case. And how our student population, our faculty populations have changed. And so an example is, at an institution like mine, we often make an assumption or we dictate by policy that undergraduate students enroll, they study with us for 4 years and they leave and successfully complete their undergraduate program, right? And we have more diverse communities at Northwestern now and at institutions like Northwestern. And so what assumptions underlie that expectation or those policies? And are those still things we want to value? So, when we have students who come from very connected family and larger communities, we value them being part of those communities just like they do, right? So if they need to take time away to do something that in the past we would have thought, well, that's not important. The most important thing in your life should always be being a student. Maybe that's not true. We just need to push on some of those assumptions with our academic partners, with our administrative partners to really figure out what do we want to do? What do we want to be as an institution? And then make the policies and processes that really align with those goals.
Thank you. I think I saw Tammy.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to piggyback a little bit on what Jackie said. When we think about it, it also has to do with how are we defining access to data? We've been very protective of student records and student data. And oftentimes we see individuals across the landscape who are less willing to share with their partners in the student success realm the data that they sit on, and then also helping those partners to understand what that data is by identifying trends, by being able to surface some of those things that we're seeing in the registrar world, whether that be DFW rates or late registration activity, all of those things that as registrars, we see those trends, but helping to surface those to these committees so that they can have not only access to the data, but understand where to keep mining with respect to programming and other types of interventions.
Thank you, Tammy. You jumped ahead a smidge, tying two questions together. So that's good. Thank you. And we have Jason, and then Jen and Julia.
I actually think Connie was before me.
Oh, Connie. Sorry. Connie, go for it.
Thank you. Thank you, Jason, as well. I was just going to say, and somewhat piggybacking off of what Jackie was sharing, that I also think it's imperative that we as registrars, understand our place in the life cycle of students. The fact that our touch point with students and to students is just as important and effective as everyone else, as FA, as admissions, who's probably, the first touch point, if you will. But setting processes and policies in place that are focused on customer service and being an advocate for the learner first, I think goes a long way towards positively impacting student success and retention.
Thank you. Jason?
I was going to go back to the challenges part of the question. And I think one of the big challenges that my institution's been facing, and talking to other folks, I think it's pretty universal, is sort of the environment changing constantly. So sort of new stuff coming at you from multiple directions. So we get, a rules change from Department of Ed at the very high level, or maybe from our accreditor. But we also have the internal, where the senior administration says, hey, we're going to do this. We're going to start offering bachelor's degrees as a community college, or we're going to start doing micro-credentials of some sort. And so we're getting we're all always getting bombarded with new initiatives. And I think the big thing, especially for the internal ones, is we're often not involved in those conversations until the decision's been made, and like, hey, we're doing this, you guys figure it out. And so I think it's definitely been a pain point for us, and trying to work with our senior administration to say, hey, if you guys are doing anything that's going to change curriculum, or it's going to change the way that we do student records, you really need to talk to us before you make the final decision.
Thank you, Jason. Julia?
As Jason said, and others, I think so much is about being at the table early, being in the conversation early, because I think registrars can sometimes be seen as standard bearers and sometimes be seen as the people who say no. And usually what we really want to say is yes and, or yes if, or there's a way forward, and typically we want to collaborate with that way forward. But sometimes if the road is paved all the way to the destination, and it's like, oh, that was a bad way to pave that road, that was a wrong direction to take. And so I think a challenge can sometimes be being in those conversations, and then how that can be addressed is, if we are in the conversations, it's a better outcome, I think, and we can be seen as a collaborator if we are indeed a collaborator, rather than someone who says, oh no, we can't possibly do that, or that would be, this is why, all the reasons why that's not the best route to the destination. So what is reinforcing for me about student success and our roles in it as administrators, and helps face the challenges, is to be in relationship with other people across our profession, but also across our institution. So that if you have coffee with someone from the provost's office once a month, you are going to be a little bit more top of mind with policy changes that they're thinking about. And if you reach out to the head of advising, you're going to again be in those conversations. And so connections are pleasant, and they also, I think, are really effective in facing challenges that we have.
Very good advice, Julia. Thank you. And if I miss seeing a hand raised, please just tell me that I'm missing you, because what's happening is your pictures are moving around the screen a little bit. Like you move, and I have no idea why that happens in Zoom, but you go from one place to the other. So please, if I miss you, please just poke at me. I have 4 more folks here, and I think Jen was next.
I love both Jason and Julia's points. I think it's really interesting. We talk to a lot of folks where strategic initiatives are basically handed down to them, and there's just not a lot of focus on how it actually gets implemented or executed. I think something that is often not discussed is the fact that if you have existing operating systems, processes, technology that really aren't capable of giving you the agility you need to actually implement these initiatives, that's kind of like the first barrier you need to overcome. I think oftentimes that gets disguised, right? And instead, we're kind of talking about high aspirations versus the first 5 or 6 steps needed to accomplish that initiative.
Jen, I'd like to add to that, it's also whether the policies are written in such a way to support what the institution's trying to do. I mean, and then pairing the technology with it. I think sometimes they conflict with each other. They just don't work together. Thank you. Let's see, we have Mark.
Yeah, real quick, I want to pick up on where Jason is. One of the challenges, I do believe, the system integration. So many of the student success programs fall in other platforms, but have to be merged. They're merging with CRM, merging with SIS. All of these things have to be managed, and the registrar needs to be part of that to ensure that you get the right people and the right components matched together. That's number one. Number two, remember, the registrars understand the data. And nothing can be worse than going through a student success data analytic program and not understanding the data, reaching incorrect solutions. So going back to Julia's and Manny's comments that we need to be at the table, we need to be at the table not only because we can understand and administer systems, but we do understand the nuances of the data, and it's very important. You can really reach wrong conclusions. I have examples, and I have a couple jokes, but I'll let it go at that at the moment.
You can put the jokes in the chat if you'd like. Or if you really must, we can hear one of your jokes now if you'd like. No? Okay. Jana?
I really appreciate a point that Julia made a moment ago, and that is that the registrar needs to be at the table. And so there are two obstacles, and that's the first one. And I would take it a step further and say a challenge is when the registrar is not at the table early. And specifically when I'm talking about establishing new programs, we had a situation recently where a new program was approved by our accreditor, and the program director sent to our registrar a full curriculum, including course numbers and paragraph descriptions up to 4 paragraphs long. Right. And so then the registrar has to go ask that person to duplicate work. Here's our convention for course numbers. Here's the character limit for our course descriptions. And that can be a real source of frustration. So Julia, I agree with you on your point. And I would say some solutions that work. You know, I've been at institutions where the provost or the chief academic officer chairs the curriculum committee, or maybe it's an elected faculty member. At my institution, the registrar chairs the curriculum committee, and that woman can run one heck of a meeting, and she keeps us honest, and she scours every syllabi to make sure that we're, you know, in compliance with the federal definition of a credit hour and everything else. The second challenge I would say is that registrar, they're everyone's most important business partner. And yet it seems that registrars spend a lot of time herding cats and chasing deadlines. And so one thing I've seen work very well is instead of saying changes to the catalog are due March 15th, is going to your program directors and saying, I need catalog changes by May 1 at the latest. What's a good time for you? What's not a good time for you? And can we come to agreement on a deadline? And then we're going to tell everyone we need it a week sooner than we actually need it, so that we're not in a panic if it comes in late.
Thank you. Thank you for your very thoughtful responses on the challenges facing registrars around student success and how they can be addressed. And you also, some of you started talking about quite a bit about technology and data, and that's actually the next two questions. But I'm going to just start with the data analytics one that Tammy started addressing a little bit and others talked about as well. So how can registrars and others related to these areas of academic operations effectively use data analytics to improve academic operations? And what advice do you have for interpreting and applying these data? Sarah.
So in a timely discussion, I was just at a meeting of our regional accreditor yesterday where we were talking about the 10-year like standard update. And actually like kind of the use of data and using it well was one of the discussions that we had, because we're often drowning in data, right? Like we have so much. And I think one of the things that we struggle with at institutional level in many institutions, maybe not all of yours, but is like, how do we have people begin to even make some sense out of that? And even I think before we get to analytics, like the kind of basic data literacy where we help people think about benchmarks, have a way to frame their data. So in my program, this is what I see. What might that mean in comparison to the institution or some other useful points, or, you know, large STEM classes versus other things? That for us is certainly a big issue. I think IR is often in that space, but I think that registrar often have a lot of operational understanding of what those useful data points might be, how they might be shaped. I think it's another one where talking about like who should be at the table. Often the people who might drive some of the questions about student success and those kind of end users are not the ones who can easily frame what the inputs might be and how we can kind of think about that. And so I think it's so important that we bring registrars in to help us think about, like, what are the key metrics that we might need people to think about? What do they see as being really important? And kind of out of that, then how do we move forward into building better data literacy and analytics across our campuses?
Thank you, Sarah. Can I follow up with, because you're talking about data literacy and analytics, what about definitions? Because when I think about definitions, because we're working on this nomenclature group at the moment, there's things like you can go at an institution and say, what's the definition of adult learner? And it could be different for every department, or even new student, it could be different for every department. So have you started to address that?
Yes, so we ended up with my boss, who is the Vice Provost for Academic Affairs, and working very, very closely with our registrars. We started work on an academic affairs glossary of terms, precisely to address some of these things. We thought it was going to be like a little side thing to something we were writing up process-wise. It turned into be like a whole summer project. And now we go and we update that. So as questions emerge, we've just been doing some evaluation of low completion programs, and some questions came up about kind of like crossover programs and the terminology we should use to define those from our department heads. And so we had some back and forth, right? How could we define those? Once we had pinned that down, we put it into our glossary of terms. We have these things on a SharePoint, so we can kind of keep the most recent one there in an archive. But we found that a really useful way to have this kind of like, what are the things that we want people to draw from kind of iPads definitions? What are the things that might be more to do with the institution? And how do we kind of keep those in one place so that most people, although I'm sure we're not most people, would not necessarily go and read those all in one place, but when they need to kind of draw on them and write something up, that we've got one place that sits. So for us, that's been a useful approach.
Absolutely, because if your definition is different from the person sitting next to you and you're looking at the same data, you could draw different conclusions from that. So thank you. Jason?
Yeah, I would really like to echo that point about definitions. At my institution, we get into these knockdown, drag out arguments about what's the difference between a course, a class, and a section. And everybody has their own definition. So that's definitely a useful thing to have those things well defined. And also to what Sarah says, I think that the one piece I didn't hear in there, but I'm sure you're thinking about it, is sort of a culture change to kind of drive people to use data as opposed to kind of only getting data when they can't answer the question based on their gut or based on something else. So trying to kind of engender that whole idea of let's look at the data and see where we should go, as opposed to we're going this direction, let's see if the data supports us.
Interesting. Thank you. Jen?
I just love the comment on the fact that institutions are really rich in data. I recently read an article, and I'll set it in the chat to everyone. It's called Universities Are Rich in Data, but kind of insight blind. And so there's so much data, it can be really hard, right, to capture the data. There's a lot of noise to sort through. And also there's a lot of confidence in the validity of the data. And so when I think of a lot of our customers are implementing things like demand insights, for example, if your program maps aren't accurate, the predictions you're going to get are also not going to be very accurate. I think one of the first steps institutions have to think about is also like, now there's a phrase like garbage in, garbage out. So like you have to really trust your data to then even add on analytics or insights to it.
Certainly. Thank you. And Jen, that is going to tie to our next conversation about technology changes. Tammy?
Yes, real quickly, just a couple of things. I think not only do you have definitions, you have to have clear definitions, you also want to make sure that you are mapping those definitions to your systems so that you understand where that data is being pulled from, and do you agree that that's the appropriate place to reflect what that definition is that you've agreed upon. So that's one piece. And then also, secondly, I would talk about in the world of analytics, I would also caution us a little bit in the world of predictive analytics, because oftentimes we're predicting based on past success and to future success. success, which could marginalize certain populations of students who perhaps have not been as successful, because of lots of different factors. And so being careful not to overly use their predictive analytics in a way that could then further marginalize individuals and steer policies, procedures, and the conversations that would make them further left behind.
Thank you, Tammy. And Jana, didn't I see your hand up?
Yes, I think Jen said a couple of things, but two words are key for me, and that's data governance. So data is useful when the data is accurate, when the data is analyzed well, and when the data is verified by a data partner. And so if your institution doesn't have a data governance initiative, the registrar is a key player in getting that up and running. And another thing that is useful is anytime that we are running academic data, even if it's through the institutional research department or sometimes through IT, the registrar is that what we call data partner, who then will pull the data their own way and certify the original data set as accurate, or identify discrepancies and work with people to rectify those errors in the data set.
Thank you, Jana. And more before I hop on, if anybody is looking to be a registrar, you have to know a lot of things. As you can tell by our experts here talking about it, it's actually a very interesting job. I worked in that role. It is diverse. It keeps you busy, and it's just fascinating how many places it touches, which is why one of the reasons why we wrote that book on academic operations and the role of the registrar. So, Mark?
Yeah, we are belt and suspenders people after all. The only thing I would add, I'm going to echo everything everybody else said. When you think about your definition of metrics, how they might be collected, what impact they might have on those who actually work on your campus, think about that. Think about your campus culture. Think about what your overall objective is and how well what you're proposing fits into that culture and your objective. You can just sink completely if what you've offered, if what you suggest is completely opposed to your campus culture, unless that's your objective.
Thank you. Thank you. And we are at 37 after the hour, if you can believe that already. So we're going to jump into the technology question, and I'm keeping an eye on the Q&A. We have a couple in there. So we'll probably leave a little bit of time. We intend to leave a little bit of time to address those. So the technology question, some of you have addressed already, to a degree. How do you keep up with technology changes and advocate for systems that support efficient academic operations? Erin.
I love this question. I think it's twofold in my mind. I think many of us have very mature systems, particularly our student information system that we maybe implemented decades ago, and we've not sort of gone through and reviewed, did I customize this? Is this still meeting my needs? Should I invest some resources and time in this to reconfigure it so it's more appropriate? Is the structure still working? That's really relevant to your micro-credentials. How can I use the system? Do I need to use the system? Should I use the system to accommodate new academic structures? And I think we assume, like Tammy said about student success, like past success indicates future success. And I think that we can get sort of like, with all of the different things going on in our world, like this is stable, this is fine. If it's not broken, do not fix it. But I think that we need to keep in the forefront that sometimes yesterday's solutions are now today's problems. And I think an antidote to that I learned later in my career is that you should, no matter whether you have purchasing power, no matter where you are in your career, keep up with the products of the industry. Start developing relationships with vendors. This can happen at the annual meeting. You can request, everyone is very happy to present for you, and you can even contextualize it. I'm not ready, I'm just interested in your product. Would you present to my team? Right? If you're at a state and regional, potentially invite a vendor of interest to that to present, right? And I think there's also other things you can do. You mentioned the exchange, ACRO has notes. EDUCAUSE, EdTech, university business, keep reading, keep investing in your knowledge, keep developing your relationships, find out what people are using, what's going well, what isn't. And so I think really we have to frame it so that we're always in a continuous business improvement mindset, and we're developing those vendor relationships as early as possible, because you never know when your boss is going to walk by your desk and you're early on in your career and say, hey, the university doesn't like this transcript solution, for example, or who knows what it could be. And you say, hey, I saw this could be cool. Maybe we should look into this. Or I know that this is best in class and here's why. I'll give you some, information to support that. And so I think it's really important to just frame it from a continuous business improvement and keep learning. That's the only way to keep up with it, because it is an industry that's changing quickly, and there's a lot of new technology out there to augment a lot of the deficiencies of the student information system, especially as it relates to academic operations and student success initiatives.
Thank you, Erin. I actually think a discussion of keeping up with technology and the changes and managing that and implementation could be its own separate roundtable. It's as can many of these other topics, but technology changes too quickly for me. I'm feeling quite dated when things move so fast. Thank you, Jackie.
Yeah, I totally agree. It can be a little overwhelming, but, keeping up with your vendors, keeping up with your peers and finding out what their experience is. A lot of institutions have a little bit of flexibility to pilot things that you might not have at your own institution. So talk to your peers about what they're learning from their experiences. The other thing I think kind of on the second half of your question is, how can we advocate for systems that support efficient or effective academic operations? I think one of the things that is really valuable in that space is to really understand what your campus needs, and not just your undergraduate programs and your PhD programs, but talk to your law school, talk to your business school, talk to your medical programs. They have very unique needs often. And if you can really understand as a registrar or someone in the provost office who can be a voice for student system needs, if you can go to your IT peers and your leadership with a really solid understanding of not just a portion of the needs, but the true campus needs, I think you're setting up projects to be more successful in the long run, because no one will be surprised, hopefully, by the expense and the extent of the work that needs to be done. And as you then go through those implementations, you can build relationships with those offices where they see you as their advocate and part of a larger team of people trying to accomplish the same thing.
I'll just add, Jackie stole my thunder, but I would also add, understand your IT unit stress points. It will help immensely.
Connie, I think I saw a chat bubble pop up and I couldn't read it very quickly. Do you want to add something?
Oh,
I put you on the spot.
I'm sorry, I could not unmute.
Yeah.
No, I just, like, Erin literally shared the same series of thoughts that had been running through my mind when, in considering that particular question. And so I just ditto everything, everything that she said. It was absolutely spot on.
Thank you. Let's see, Sarah.
I think one of the things that also happens is sometimes we address the kind of tech things in a piecemeal kind of way. I know, speaking as someone at like a large public, is like, we've got some strict procurement rules and we do it in this way, and this thing happens at this time, and then, oh, here's another thing we're doing, and we're 2 years off even being able to think about this other thing. And so we end up often with different things that are not well integrated and aren't well planned. And one of the things that I think is important, although we definitely haven't achieved it at my institution, but I keep bugging people about it, is, having some strategy in place as well. I think this goes back to some of the earlier discussions about having different people at the table and how important the registrar is in that conversation. But also when people have talked about, like, ITS, IR, but also for those of us in the kind of accreditation space, right, doing that kind of work, is like, often we don't have a strategy in place of like, where could we be 5 years from now with some of these really great integrated systems? And for us, that can mean that when we do have a question and we look at some tech stuff, and a vendor is saying like, here's this big system that's bells and whistles, we can't even really think about it because we've got some other pieces that we can't replace. And I think that's something that we were certainly not taught to do that. That's not an approach that comes out in, you know, many programs to say like, take that step back. But I think in the way that we have to approach our work now and the speed of some of that change and the power of what's out there, it really behooves us to try and take a step back and have people build some strategy around this and some long-term planning. And I know a lot of our strategies talk about how we want to improve things. They don't actually surface, right, the systems and the structures often that will go through. They surface the processes, but those processes will often be better if we have the right systems in place. And so I think this is really something that registrars can advocate for a lot, which is like, how do we plan and how do we not just kind of keep up as we go, but like really think out, you know, many years in advance, and so that we can try and think about some things together.
Thank you, Sarah. So not only do registrars and the folks who work with them in the academic operations have to keep track of the day-to-day minutia, but they also have to think systemically, think long-term. It's a fascinating career. It really is. And for those of you who have both the registrar's role and another role, I can't even imagine the breadth and depth of that. So Jason and then
registrars,
Jen.
it's the bloody life.
It's Jason.
So I have really good thoughts people are putting out. I think I like the idea of developing those relationships with vendors, because you can actually then have some insight into what's going on, and the vendors are always happy to share, you know, as was said. I think the piece that I didn't quite hear, but I think was alluded to, is internal conversations to kind of break down some of those silos, because different units within your college or university are using different systems, and a lot of times there needs to be integration, right? So the way my institution does it, for particular products, we have a user group for each product. So our degree audit software, there's a group that meets monthly with financial aid, registrar, curriculum, IT, all the people that actually have their fingers in that system, they meet. And then we have a higher level, a system user group, which is everybody from the chief information officer down to people like me that are administering our curriculum and catalog systems. And so we hear what's changing, or like if there's a big update to a student information system, we have a heads up that there's going to be a testing period and things like that. And being able to talk to all those people on a regular basis, and it becoming very sort of built into the culture, like, hey, if we're making a change here, we need to check with these other folks. That's been really successful for us.
Thank you. And align with that, with the things we were talking about, getting a group together for defining data and for analytics, is also doing an inventory of your technology. This is an example. I was working with 5 institutions working together, just talking about moving credits from one place to the other. Those 5 institutions had 35 different technologies across and within the institution that were supporting just credit mobility. It was incredible. It's like, wow, that's just a lot of moving parts. So I'll go with Jen and then Aaron, and then we're going to probably wrap it up here a bit with a quick round robin and get to the Q&A. So Jen?
I just want to say, from the vendor perspective, registrars are superheroes. Like, we literally, within internally at CourseDoc, like, we call registrars superheroes, because we know they have to do so many different responsibilities. They're covering so many different products. Just want to reiterate, there's absolutely no problem reaching out to a vendor, even if not interested in buying, just to do a demonstration, just to learn a little bit more than happy to have those types of conversations. And also, I think vendors are really excited to actually partner with folks on how to present the leadership or how to navigate the procurement process, what sorts of internal politics might be required to get software purchased. We can provide things like ROI, case studies, social proof. And from the product perspective, I think I wish more people took advantage of that, because we're really willing to take on that workload, knowing it can be a lot.
Thank you, Jen. Aaron?
I don't know how I follow registrars are superheroes, but I will say that I've seen tendencies on campuses to look at the initial investment in the technology and not create a sustainability plan. And I think that's a place where people go awry. I also want to acknowledge I've seen on some campuses that the job descriptions that we are working from, the pay scales that we're using to pay our employees are woefully outdated and are not keeping up with the level of skills needed to work in a technified sort of like industry. And so I think the other part of that maintenance plan, aside from who's going to maintain it, who's going to update it, who's going to continue to pay for it, is do I have the staff and the skills and the job descriptions and the pay to support my team maintaining that? Because there's still an assumption on some campuses that we are clerical people, and that is not the case. So do not neglect your job descriptions and find ways to tie into the advance in tech to support your initiatives moving your people forward.
Lots of thumbs up, hearts and clouds for that one, Erin. And I'm not trying to sell more of the book, but if you need something to move folks forward, that book that says here's what registrars do might help you if you need it. So round robin, I'm gonna call on you, each of you, please, if you don't mind, if you're gun shy a little bit here, or a little bit shy of it, just to say I don't want to answer that question, but I'm trying to combine the last few kind of. So quick round robin, top 3 critical skills for registrars to support academic operations. So agile, responsive academic operations. If off the top of your head, top 3 skills. And I think I'm going to give you a little bit of time to think about that and go with Julia.
Humor, humor. I've got humor 3 times. We need humor.
That works. Let's see, Connie.
Okay, top 3. The first one that came to mind was like tech adjacent. I won't say tech savvy, but you need to have some technical knowledge and not be afraid to learn some technical knowledge. Collaborative, I think, is extremely important, and a planner. A good planning and organizational skills, they go together.
Thank you, Connie. Let's see, Jenna.
I would say number 1, strategist. Number 2, truth teller. And number 3, collaborative solution finder.
Thank you. Jackie?
I think logical thinking, great problem solving skills, and an orientation toward student and faculty success.
Thank you. Sarah?
I mean, I think relationship building for sure, humor as well, just in some of the things that pop up. I certainly get to laugh sometimes with our registrar as we work through some of the things, and also just to kind of interest in keeping up with things that are changing, right? Like I think someone early on mentioned, right, we get new regulations, we get new things in. So I think that kind of lifelong learning, where we are now is definitely not where we're going to be in a few years, and an ability to want to kind of dive in and be on the front of it.
Thank you, Sarah. Erin?
I would say curiosity and the ability to think in a divergent way. I would say being a diplomat is mission critical to our effectiveness. And I would say on the hardest days when you're feeling really overwhelmed, having that service orientation and connecting that to your value set is really critical. You have a huge opportunity here to positively benefit an institution, and it's important to remember that on the hard days.
Thank you. Jason?
So I've got a few. The first is, I think you have to have a student focus. You have to be thinking about what your decision is going to do to that incoming freshman or that person that's coming back to school after a long time away. Relationship building is key. Being able to have good relationships with your administration, with financial aid, with your IT folks, your student services folks. Having all those things is just, it's what they call a force multiplier, right? If you have all of those things going and you have those good relationships, things tend to flow better. And then I think having a solid team has been really the success that I've experienced. When we had a sort of fractured team, it didn't think, just nothing worked as well. We have a really solid team right now, and we all care about each other. We're all ready to jump in and help each other, and not trying to do it all alone by yourself, but using that team.
Thank you. Mark?
I think I have three. One is humor, which has been mentioned. The next one I think is collaboration, flexibility, but be thinking about the shared goals. What's the shared goal of your office? What's the shared goal of the campus? Who might you align with? And I think the third is integrity. You got to be trusted. If you want to be at a place at the table, you've got to be trusted. That stems from integrity, both from you and your office. Hey, and the last thing I'll say, because I think we'll get cut off, is I am amazed at the wisdom on the screen in front of me. And it reminds me of what my dad said, which is, Mark, pints, gallons, and liters, it speaks volumes. And that's what these people have done today.
Jen, do you mind if we hop into the Q&A real quick? So we can, okay, cool. Thank you. So we have a, thank you, Mark. You had to get one out, didn't you? I think the first one is kind of a commentary more than a question. The second one, it says, given the importance of data, would you say that records professionals should be required to go through formal data analytics program certification? I have a hard time wrapping my head around the idea of needing to learn data analytics programming, SQL, Python, et cetera, and to do advanced data analytics. It's not what my degree was in, and it's not something that is easily learned. I see Aaron is typing an answer, but if anyone wants to give that a real quick shout out. I see how somebody, the last one is also a comment. I would love to see a roundtable on improving governance in your college culture. We definitely want ideas for that. So do you guys think that you should be required to go through formal data analytics programs and certifications? He's shaking his head. We have a couple minutes. It's generally not really.
I would say no. There's a triad that makes it work. It's the registrar, institutional research, and IT in partnership. And if you have clear roles and responsibilities, you will have business partners who can do the analytics for you and with you.
Okay.
I'd echo that with the addition that we fairly recently had an open position, and having some data background was part of that, the way we wrote that job description, because realized that we didn't have that asset in our office, and bringing that internal, although working with IT and institutional research is easy, having that internal person for the quick questions was very efficient.
Aaron?
I would say it's important to have some facility with data, and you probably already have that through your roles. I also think when it kind of comes to like student success and some of the leadership stuff that we do, having the familiarity to read articles, to use theory and apply it to practice is important. So that's more like educational statistics and consumption of that. That will go a long way if you're trying to insert yourself into student success initiatives. Understanding what's measured, understanding what others are seeing would be helpful, but I don't think it's a requirement.
Thank you. Aaron, Mark, Connie, Jason, Sarah, Julia, Jackie, Jen, you popped around on me again. Oh man, you moved, Sarah. All right. And Jana, I think I got everybody. I think you moved all of a sudden. Thank you. Thank you so much for taking your time today to have this discussion with us. And I want to thank everyone here who's participated as well. Please, if you want some more roundtables like this, where we're doing Q&A about academic operations or anything else that ACRO has a part of, please let us know. You can send it Heather or myself or Belma a message. Remember ACRO Exchange, your colleagues will help you if you go into ACRO Exchange and you have questions like this, folks. People are more than happy to talk with you. And so with that, I want to thank everyone for participating. We popped in academic operations book in the chat, I think a couple of times, but reach out to any of us. And thank you, everyone, and hope you have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.